Let's face it, folks, there's going to come a time where the kids are going to grow up and leave home, and it's going to be the two of you.
Yeah.
So we have to build for the long haul. And if we're not talking now...
Now, on that point, I think you and Sandro have successfully transitioned into that. So what would you say were important things for you with your boys to ensure going forward that when the boys do move out, that you have still a strong friendship and a strong marriage?
You are listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Under the Rug. I am your host, Nalini Tranquim, and today you are going to hear from my incredible sister, so I'm talking blood relative sister, Hannah van Rooyen. She is a mighty woman of God, and I was having a conversation with her recently, and we've decided that we are together going to unpack major transition points in a woman's life. And we felt so strongly that today we need to talk about from woman to wife. So please welcome my gorgeous sister, Hannah. Hello, beautiful.
Hi, sis. How are you?
I am so good. Thank you so much for making yourself available. I so appreciate it. Hannah and her husband are pastoring an incredible church in Gaborone in Botswana. So if ever you are that side of the world, you need to pay them a visit because what God is doing in and through them is absolutely incredible. Hannah, we are going to get up close and personal with you today, my girl.
Yes, I'm ready.
Are you ready? You do know that this podcast is called Under the Rug, yeah? So we talk about the stuff that we generally tend to want to bury, but we're not doing that. Not on this forum. So, my darling sister, we are unpacking from woman to wife today. And where I want to start is by asking you, what were the major adjustments to married life for you personally, and how did you navigate them?
Awesome. I think as you were saying, under the rug, I think it's exactly that. It's uncovering things that we don't talk about to see people find freedom in those areas.
100%.
I think the fact that we realize communication is the answer to 90% of our issues, right? So to answer your question, I think what an awesome topic to cover. So growing up, we grew up, obviously you and I, in a pastoral household, and I think our perceptions of things, were very much focused upon God and the ways of God. So I grew up very much, even as a child, deciding that I want to get married one day, I want to have a husband, I want to have children, and one of the major things that I kept close to my heart, I think, from a youth group was that I would like to be a virgin when I get married.
Wow.
And I wanted to, preserve my virginity for, one day getting married to someone and giving myself fully to that person. And I think as much as, in the Christian world, we look at that and we think, wow, that's amazing, which I would genuinely love for my own children too. It is a blessing in a way, and yet I found that for me, that was one of the biggest mountains to overcome after getting married.
Wow, okay.
So for me, the commitment to remaining a virgin, I was very, strong on that. I would have a boyfriend here and there, and if they were not willing to keep that promise with me, I was not willing to even entertain the relationship, so in that way, I thank God that he gave me that persistence in that way.
Wow.
And yet I realized that the day that me and my husband got married, it was like this wall of, but this is the law that I've held myself under for so long. It was such a mountain for me to climb in order to actually realize I had permission to actually have sex with this man.
Oh my God.
I had kept myself, and for such a long time, it's almost like maybe being a vegetarian for so long, and then you decide you're going to eat meat, and then all of a sudden you're like, can I do it? It's a travesty against every animal upon this planet. So I think for me, it was completely a mind shift that after a long time only, I realized that it was something that I was allowed. I think it took a lot of patience from JJ's side. I think it took a lot of support. It took a lot of understanding. It took a lot of realizing that, this is something that has been so deeply ingrained.
Wow.
That now I've got to really work at making this transition into being a married woman and realizing that God looks upon sex and the marriage bed as a blessing and as a beautiful thing.
I find that so interesting because you and I are complete opposites in this realm. Yeah. I was a little bit of a rebel, and as much as I loved the Lord, I was still messing around and doing all sorts, which I'm embarrassed to admit. But it's so interesting because even though I was messing around, I knew it was wrong. But my understanding that it was wrong was more so that sex itself was wrong. And so even after I got married to my husband, I still felt like what we were doing was wrong. And it was still wrapped in guilt and shame. So it's so interesting how the enemy comes and kills, steals, and destroys in this area, both in the woman who's kept herself pure for marriage and the woman who didn't. And he targets both of them in the exact same way.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, is that in a way, like you're saying, it's the enemy actually bringing an attack upon sex, which is such an important and vital part of marriage.
Yes.
And he is using the same weapon in two completely different women's experiences.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I knew that what I was doing was wrong, and I had to then come before God and ask for repentance and fix things with him, right? And put things right with him. But then I still had to go on this journey of, and I guess it's the same with you, and I'd love to hear more from you as to how that looked for you. But I had to then go on this journey of reprogramming my internal narrative when it came to sex, that actually within the confines of my marriage, this is a beautiful and healthy thing and something that God wants for us.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think, I think one of the biggest things that I, in a way, fell into in that regard was that because my idea, like you were saying, my main purpose behind not having sex before I got married, I realized was not because of a place of peace and a place of decision making and a place of, this is what I would love to do. I would love to keep myself as a virgin. I only realized after getting married that it was very much based on, it's shameful before you get married. It's something that God looks away. It's something that is seen as sin. It's, so I think we both experienced that same level of condemnation when it came to sex as a whole.
Yes.
That no matter what experience we came from, we were both climbing exactly the same mountain of reprogramming.
Wow.
And I think for me, the reprogramming came in building trust. It came in literally having to remind myself, this is okay. This is good.
Yes.
This is beautiful. This is something. It's going back to what even the Bible says and listening to podcasts from, women that were talking about God and sex. And I think one thing that really changed my perspective was that we think that even as a married couple, when we have sex, that God looks away. And yet he doesn't. It's not that he's looking and going, "Whoa, look at that." But for him, it's not how we perceive the physical act of sex. For him, it's like unity beyond measure. This is what's building. And yet I think the enemy stole it so much to the point that, and I'm going to be very honest in saying this, is that at some point, my prayer before God was, Lord, why was I a virgin when I got married?
Wow. 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 Yeah.
That I felt, had I maybe been promiscuous, I would be a lot more liberal in this area.
Yes. And yet, look at your sister. She wasn't. She was also riddled with guilt and shame. And that's exactly...
So that's again a lie.
Yes, that's exactly what the enemy wants, right? Is to...
100%.
Yes, is to steal that which is beautiful before God and in the confines of marriage, right? And
Yes.
make it something that is perverse and shameful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whew. Okay, so it's not much different then, even for those who struggle in their marriages in the area of sex because of abuse that they've experienced in the past, sexual abuse that they've experienced, where as a result of that abuse, sex in your eyes is now perverse and it's dirty and it's unclean.
Yes.
Wow. And yet our God is a God of healing and restoration, and he wants to see his people set free in that area. So how do we heal from that?
I think, you've touched on something important, is our past. That I thought to myself, even, where does this idea that sex is shameful and dirty come from? Like, it's not like we get born knowing these things. We don't get born thinking sex is wrong. We don't get born thinking. So it comes from conversations we've had, maybe the way we've been brought up, maybe things that have happened. And I think for you, like you're saying, when it comes to sexual abuse, I think the reality is that people will have these experiences and put them under the rug. Right? So, going along with this podcast we're talking about is that a lot of people put these things under the rug. And I've seen with children, they are resilient. They are able to adapt. They're able to dig things deep, right? And that's why you'll find that with me, let's say I'm sitting with people now who are adults where these things are only surfacing now because they've dug that thing so deep. And yet I always say, the more you pack things under a rug, the more you're going to create a mountain in that rug that eventually you're going to be falling over that thing every time you walk over that rug.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually.
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to avoid it.
It's almost like, it looks like a puff adder that's eaten up that deer, and his stomach is like this massive thing.
It's so true.
And the snake is there like, I'm just a snake. You're like, no, you've got this massive load which you've not dealt with yet. And I think that's it. I think it's about realizing that, yes, you have gone through that, but that does not define what sex is, and it doesn't define who you are.
That's correct.
So I think it's learning to separate yourself from that. And you do that through going for counseling, through building a trust relationship. It's through taking a bit of time. It's through being honest about what's happened to you. It's about taking ownership of that which you faced and realizing that that isn't who you are. And that, as you said, God can heal, restore, and return everything that has been stolen from you.
Yes, agreed. And I think just a word of advice for the men here, because us women, we need to verbally process things, okay, that we struggle with and that we're wrestling with or having to come to terms with. And so we need to know as women that we can come to our men and that our men are going to be a safe space for us, where they are going to listen and just hear us, not try and fix us, but just listen and love us through this process of healing and restoration. In fact, the Lord only asks that two or more gather in his name.
Yeah.
And it will be done. Whatever you bring before him, it will be done. And so I actually encourage husbands and wives to start creating a safe space within your marriage for the two of you to be able to talk about these issues and these struggles, okay?
Yes.
There's no point as a woman for you to continue going through your marriage hating, detesting sex, because that's only going to cause a wedge between you and your husband. It also then opens up the door for the enemy to come and kill, steal, and destroy in other ways. And that's why we see adultery taking place and marriages falling apart, because we build our walls where we end up blocking out the people that we actually love and we're trying to build relationship with. But because of our own hurt and shame and guilt, we erect these walls and then we're not allowing them in, you know? So
very true.
Yeah, so I think it's just so important. Just while you were speaking, I just felt so strongly to say, listen, men, it's so important that you create a safe space for your women to be able to talk openly and honestly about their struggles, but also vice versa. You see, I think sometimes us girls think that our men have got it all together in this area.
Yes.
But no, that is not the case. And our men need to be able to talk and know that we are going to keep what is shared confidential and within the confines of our marriage, and not go blurting it out to every, you know, Susan down the road, you know.
Yes.
For us to be able to face it together and grow and learn together in these areas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what you're saying about, you know, learning to be able to build that place of safety and communication is so important. I mean, I use this example often that when Ariana, my daughter, was growing up, she had eczema and it was quite bad when she was young. So she would, out of reflex, she would scratch it, but then she would sometimes scratch it open that it would start to bleed. And immediately when I would see that, I would put some cream on it and I would cover it up with a bandage and, you know, hopefully it's going to heal and, you know, try use my own remedy and all of that. And I remember going to a dermatologist once and she said, the worst thing that you can actually do is cover it up. Because what it does is it starts to get warm and cozy in that place of darkness, that it starts to fester even more. So the best thing you can do is to uncover it, to put light and to put air on it.
Yes.
So she was, you know, and I use that really to say that it's the same when it comes to things that we have hidden in darkness, things that we feel that we are ashamed about, things that we fear, things that we've maybe experienced in our past that we feel too vulnerable to open up. But realizing that if we can take these positive steps to opening this thing up, true healing can start to come. Because the devil likes to keep things in darkness. He likes to keep things in silence and in quiet. But if we can start to open it up to God, to the people that we trust, to our partner, being vulnerable, you start to see that the whole healing process can truly begin.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you there. Now, you mentioned a second major adjustment that you experienced to married life when you first got married, in the area of transitioning in age as a woman. I'd love to hear more about that. Will you share with everyone listening?
Absolutely. I think, you know, I got married young, and, you know, I think when I first got married, I was bedazzled. I was, you know, overthrown with this hunk of a husband, and he is a strong man. He's a great leader. So I think I was very starstruck in the sense that, you know, this is everything that I trusted God for in a husband, and he still is.
Yeah.
So for me, I think, you know, going into being married and caring for him and nurturing, I think in my personality, I've always been that kind of person. So for me, that transition in itself, getting married initially, wasn't a huge transition for me. But what I found was, and I've seen this with a number of ladies that I've sat with, is transitioning past your 30s, being married. I think as a woman in your own individual right, you start to become a lot more, who is this person? Who is this woman? Who is this person that God's created? What is my purpose? Where do I fit in? How can I start making, an impact around the people that I'm with and the children that I have, maybe if you've had kids already by this age. And I think for me, a big transition, not only for myself, but for JJ too, was seeing that this woman isn't just the yes and amen, that I was when I was, 10 years back. I think I started trying my best not to be rebellious, but I can be pretty stubborn and pretty hard-headed and pretty opinionated. And I think it started to develop more as I was getting a bit older, a bit more sure of myself, and also in a way trying to find my place within the marriage.
Yes.
When it came to more than just making food, producing children, those kind of things.
Yes.
It was more as, where does Hannah belong in this partnership, as opposed to, I'm the wife role and this is my piece and my portion for the rest of my life.
I love that so much. I'm so blessed because Sandro and I, even from, the early days of us even dating, always used to talk about our functions for each other is to bring out the best in each other.
Amazing.
So I do everything I can in my power to support him to be everything that he has on the inside of him to be, whilst he does the same for me, where we actually become each other's cheerleaders in life, right? So I almost feel like for me, my man was already very much aware that he needed to draw that out of me. Now, obviously, for different couples, it's different. I mean, if I think about you guys, JJ's background is very different to your background. So share a little bit about where JJ's coming from in terms of his family.
So I think this is something funny that we've spoken about. I mean, on a funny side, there were interesting transitions, difference in culture completely. And I mean, if you were to look at me and JJ, people would assume, they're just from the same culture, and yet we come from worlds apart. Me being from a British Indian family and JJ coming from a very Afrikaans Namibian family where they, also have their own ways of doing things. And I think one of the things that I laugh about the most is when we first got married, I mean, Dad used to always lock the house and switch the lights off and make sure the gate was locked and make sure the animals were where they should be. And, that was what Dad did. And yet in his family, that's what his mum did. So in the beginning, when we first got married, we'd be sitting in bed upstairs and then I would look at him and go, have you not switched the lights off and locked the doors? He's looking at me going, have you not switched the lights off and locked the doors? So we realized that, it's more than just two people coming together. It's a completely different cultural background.
Totally.
And I think in saying that, JJ has come from a background where, again, it's very much, I guess in today's society you would say old school, that, the husband is the man of the house and he brings all the finances in and the woman must stay home and she must bear children and, bake and make nice things and, things like that, which is, there's nothing wrong with coming from that understanding.
Give him sex as soon as he steps in the front door.
In the door. Don't hand him the child that's screaming that you've been spending all day with. Yeah. You've got to put on that lingerie and you've got to bake something delicious and you've got to come say, babe, come. I've done nothing all day but wait until you got home. So I think for us it was a bit of a transition because of, and this is one thing we talk about often and even our premarital counseling, is expectation. We both came into marriage with specific expectations. And sometimes we don't even realize that we have the expectation until the frustration kicks in because we realize it's not fulfilled.
Yeah.
So coming into that marriage, him expecting maybe certain things, not with an ill heart, but because that is what has been modeled to him. And I think that's where, again, sometimes the clashes would come in. And I'm sure many of the ladies listening to this would have said to their husband at least once, if you wanted to marry your mum, then go home and spend time with your mother. But I'm not your mother.
I am not your mother.
And yet I think sometimes also maybe similar from his side, that he feels, if I'm falling short or not fulfilling. And I think that's where that coming together and again communicating, what is important for you, babe? Like you were saying, and it's so beautiful, that Sandro is there to really try his best to do what he can, that you fulfill all that you've been created for, and you vice versa. And yet, what would you say, sis? I'm asking this as I was thinking. What would you say to, let's say, a marriage who's listening in, and either both of them are feeling, or maybe the wife is listening in and feeling, but I don't have that?
Yeah, 100%. My gosh, and that's rife, unfortunately, where she has no voice. She has no voice. Look, at the end of the day, it has to boil down to open communication between the two of you. Something must have attracted the two of you to each other for you guys to be married right now, right?
Yes.
So it's about going back to that place. What was it? Well, we used to have a laugh together. We used to joke, and, he just used to bring out the best in me. Like he thought I was so beautiful, and he treated me like a real lady, and he just ticked all the boxes, and vice versa. For him, he's like, yes, this is the woman that I want to spend the rest of my life with. Okay, but then if we want our marriages to work, both parties have to be willing to come to the table. Marriage is all about that compromise, that ebb and flow of, hang on a second, it can't all be about me. I've got to create space for him or her to be able to find safety in me, to be able to confide and talk about some of these struggles that I'm facing being married to you, so that we can together find a common ground to be able to move past it and flourish,
Absolutely.
So I think for the woman who feels mute, don't stay mute. Okay, because that pattern is only causing, how did you define it? You said the pile under the rug is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's like this massive lump.
It's causing you just to shovel too much stuff under your carpet, that eventually you end up becoming the monster, when you've not actually given your husband a chance by communicating with him.
100%. We build these narratives in our mind. Oh, well, he's not going to understand. He's a bloke, or...
Absolutely.
Right? Or he's too busy. He's not going to care about... No, he does care. He wouldn't have signed his life away on the dotted line to be with you if he didn't care.
Yes. Yes. I think one of the things that... someone once said to me before, and I thought it's so profound actually when it comes to marriage. We were talking about staff, and we were talking about how someone was not fulfilling a role. And when she said it, I thought it's the same when it comes to marriage. She said to me, but Hannah, have you thought about this person? Is it that they have an evil intent or a harmful intent, or is it because they've made a mistake?
Wow.
And I think it was very much along that line, that has your husband treated you this way because he's an evil person, because he's narcissistic, because he's abusive? That's a whole different ballgame.
Different ball game, and a real ball game at that.
A real ball game. So that is something to understand, that there is a big difference.
Yes.
But if that isn't the case,
correct,
it's quite a huge possibility that he's navigating this thing and making a few mistakes. And the way in order to be gracious to him is to have the conversation.
Yes. Come on. Yes. It gives you both the opportunity.
Yes.
Yes.
Like with let's say, for example, JJ. he has not been brought up, and it's not a bad thing to his parents, but they did not grow up affectionate. They didn't grow up with words of affirmation much in their household. His mother is amazing. His dad is amazing. And yet in this area, they didn't have a lot of that. Whereas we grew up in a household where there was quite a lot of affection and affirmation and things like that, right? So I grew up, even in my personality, I appreciate it from people that I love, right? So for a long time in marriage, I felt unfulfilled in that area. I would feel like, and exactly as you said, I would build up a picture that JJ is this hard-headed person who does not like to give me affection, does not like to tell me that I look beautiful. And I'm thinking in my head, he doesn't like doing it. That's why he doesn't do it.
Wow.
Meanwhile, for him, it doesn't come naturally for him. He wasn't even aware that I was hoping for it. And until I gave him the chance by actually talking to him about it,
100%. Yeah.
he wasn't able to fulfill that for me.
Because he didn't know.
100%.
Yeah. So we're actually not doing any favors by our men if we don't create that space to be able to talk.
Yes.
And
100%.
open up. And it has to go both ways. If there's stuff that we as women are doing that is impacting our men negatively, they need to be able to come to us and go, babe, listen, we need to have a chat about this. We've been working with some couples in the realm of marriage, actually, so this is quite timely. But what Sandra and I were chatting about, and what Sandra said was, just remember, babe, that a woman can be a man's glory or his greatest downfall.
Sure.
Okay? We actually carry a lot of power as women, a lot of influence.
That's right.
Okay? Behind a very strong and powerful man is an incredible woman. Okay?
Yeah.
Because she sees him at his weakest. Yeah? And she can either drill the nail into the coffin, or she can be the one that draws him out and builds him up and spurs him on and encourages him to be all that he can be. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so it's very important, even for us as women, to be very mindful of how we are treating our men in the marriage.
Absolutely.
You know, if we're living life from the standpoint of he doesn't understand me, he doesn't care about me, he's not fulfilling my needs, and we have our walls built, how is that translating verbally when we speak to him, physically when we connect with him or don't connect with him? How is it, what is the knock-on effect of your own walls that you're building? So here's the thing.
Yes.
This is what I've learned, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But quite often we go into marriage counseling thinking that the only way this marriage is going to work is if he changes.
100%.
Yikes. What's the truth, though?
So I would say that in itself is pride personified.
Ooh.
Like, I think if someone could create a tablet for marriage, which was to bring pride down and to make communication go up, I think there would be an answer to all marriages right there.
Wow.
I think because, again, exactly as you said, I am waiting for JJ to change first. Then I will do what he expects of me.
Right.
He's feeling the same. And yet I think the key is, and I think this is where, again, the Bible challenges us so much, is that it never talks about waiting for your person to come to you and sort something out. It always addresses a soft answer turns away wrath. Who's that? It's not him, it's me.
Exactly.
Right? Love mercy, right? We don't love mercy, we love justice. And yet it says, do justice, love mercy. And yet we love justice and we do mercy.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So for example, now I'm at home. JJ left the house without giving me a hug. He doesn't realize it. I call him an Easter Island head sometimes. You know those giant Easter Island heads? I say, you're just like a blockhead. You just disappear out of the house, and you do not think that I've woken up this morning dreaming of how my husband is going to give me this romantic cuddle and tell me how gorgeous I am. And then I'll be making the breakfast in my dressing gown with no makeup on and all of these things. He goes out of the house. Then for the rest of the day, I'm thinking, he didn't give me a hug and a kiss. Then before I know it, he doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. It's all about him. He's just this and he's just that. By the end of the day, we come home from a long day at the office. I've boiled up this witch's brew in my heart.
Oh.
And what's going to happen? He's going to say something like, so what's for dinner?
Ooh.
And then I'm going to go, all that you want from me is to make supper. Meanwhile, all it took for me was this morning, as he's walking out the door, running to him, pulling his hand and saying, babe, remember to give me a kiss.
Yeah. Or you give him one, and yes, and that whole thing would have dissipated.
Because now I'm not going, he should have done it for me,
yes.
Therefore I'm not going to do it for him,
right.
Because that is a lose-lose situation. I often say to JJ, it is not about who is right and who is wrong.
Yeah.
It's about us learning to come together and realizing that if the one wins the argument, the other one loses, we actually both lose.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think pride is a big thing in that area, and it's about going to yourself, maybe journaling down the things that are frustrating you. Like for me, I find sometimes, and I think a lot of women deal with that, is that you find, okay, but if I go into this conversation with my husband, I'm probably going to cry and he's going to feel like I'm manipulating him. So how do I then communicate these things?
Yeah.
So I find, okay, let me go write this stuff down. Let me think about it a bit. Let me cool myself down. Let me go and spend a bit of time looking at these things. Are they serious? Where have I maybe gone wrong? And then opening the ground for the conversation.
Love that. I love that, because then you're not going in heated and emotionally charged. You're going in after having a time of prayer and meditation. Much better approach.
Because then instead of it being a WhatsApp message that says, we have to talk later, full stop.
Yeah.
It is maybe a voice note that says, hi, babe, if there's a chance later, could we maybe sit by the pool and have a chat?
Yes.
You're already setting the atmosphere
Of course you are.
For a productive conversation.
Yes, of course you are. Yes, exactly. We don't have to go into these kinds of conversations as if we're out to punish each other. Because that's not going to help the marriage, is it? At the end of the day.
No.
And we want to build this marriage for it to last. Because let's face it, folks, there's going to come a time where the kids are going to grow up and leave home, and it's going to be the two of you.
Yeah.
So we have to build for the long haul. And if we're not talking now...
Now, on that point, I think you and Sandro have successfully transitioned into that. So what would you say were important things for you with your boys to ensure going forward that when the boys do move out, that you have still a strong friendship and a strong marriage?
Listen, the teenage years are brutal because we've got now young, hormonal, impending adults in formation, and they are beginning to see how easy it is to manipulate and, be the cause of friction between mum and dad. And if we're not careful, we can play right into their hands. And all that's doing is causing a greater wedge between mum and dad. All right. And so for us, well, I think more so from Sandro, actually, because he observed it a lot quicker than I did. I was like, no, they're my precious boys. They wouldn't manipulate me. Oh. Sandro could see straight through it, probably because Sandro was
I think men have that sixth sense.
And so Sandro would say, listen, you and I are going to be the ones living together when these two have left home. So you and I need to be on a united front at all times.
Wow.
And he would not allow the boys to come between us. He just would not stand for
That's
it.
amazing.
And it's so amazing how I am so happy to say that our boys have left home and they're now living their own lives, and it's fabulous. And it's almost like Sandra and I have now entered the honeymoon phase, of just the two of us now. And we're able to build our marriage in a completely different dimension to how it was when we were so full on and so focused with the raising of children, which is such an important part of marriage, but it's been such a joy. I had decided I was not going to suffer with empty nest syndrome. I was just like, I am not going there. I know that that's a thing for many people, and yes, I did grieve for a time, but I made sure that it was short-lived. I didn't wallow in it, because I knew that it was now an opportunity for me to be able to achieve things, and for my husband and I as a couple to be able to do things that we maybe never had the time or the capacity to be able to do when we were full-time parents.
That's right. That's right. And I think, obviously the parenting side is a completely different topic, but I think when it relates to marriage, it's realizing that, and one thing that I've seen that I find is people have a lot of guilt when it comes to, especially mums, when it comes to choosing the husband's side over the children.
I tell you.
That in a way we have this maternal instinct to want to come up for our kids all the time. And yet you realize that, again, these people, you've got them for a certain time. You're responsible to steward them to be good human beings, but they're going to move out one day, and then you're stuck there with this person who can either potentially be your best friend for the future going forward, or someone that you literally do not know.
Right.
And I think it's like setting those boundaries already from a young age with your children, that, making sure to go away and organizing people to look after them. They're going to be fine.
Yes.
I sometimes will say to the kids, go away. I want to spend time with dad.
Yes.
And people feel, a sense of guilt maybe, or, that's not fair on the child. It's just a child. But the child also needs to learn to respect the relationship that you have with your spouse.
100%.
And I think it's up to us to set that boundary and to teach them that this is important.
Love that. I love that. That is critical for the marriage to remain healthy. But also one thing came to mind as well while you were just talking there is, I know for some women that transition from being the early days of marriage wife to then being a mum, the falling into the trap of now treating the husband like a child rather than my lover and my partner and my best friend.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, and we need to be so careful of that. We need to be so
Absolutely.
careful of that.
And I think that's exactly it, is realizing. And yet, on the other hand, I think both of us have spoken about that as well, is that there is still a lot of compassion for women when we transition to being a mum for the first time. So there's a place of understanding. But I think, like you were saying, it's about deciding before baby comes that, yes, this is going to be a whirlwind of a transition, and it's not going to be this idealistic picture of what I maybe have in my mind. But ultimately, it's going to be easier with my husband on my side. He's not my enemy. He's not... he's also there for the first time. And I think this is what we also don't realize, is that dads also become dads for the first time when they're a new dad.
So true. So
yes.
True.
So we look at them like, why are you not doing this? Why are you not fulfilling that? Where are you falling short? And yet he's just as bewildered and just like a deer in the headlights as what we are, even more so in places where men feel their sense of responsibility.
Yes.
I've got to pay the bills. I've got to make sure. He's already thinking for college later. And I think that's it. It's about even having these conversations before Baba comes along. And if you haven't been able to, making a choice saying it's not working how it is right now.
Yes.
What are we going to change?
I love that.
And how are we going to change it? And I think one of the things that, I often talk about, and it sounds like a silly thing, is setting a boundary of a nighttime routine with your kids.
Yes.
Making sure that your children are going to bed at a reasonable hour.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you're both working, do you guys have time to spend not even necessarily doing anything drastic or dramatic, But just being able to sit alone, watching a movie, chatting, having a drink,
Yes.
even having sex.
Yes.
When do we set time for this?
Yes.
If Tommy and Julia are running around the house,
Yes.
I can tell you now, I don't know if I'm the only woman, but if I'm getting in the mood and I hear any child sound, my flatline is going to be...
And on that
Perfect
note,
timing for my alarm to go off. My flatline is just going to go non-existent.
I think we need to do an episode on wife to mother, so that we can really delve into the parenting side of these
100%.
major transition points, because I think there is just so much gold for us to still unpack. Hannah, thank you so much for your time. What you have brought to the table today has been absolutely invaluable, and I know it's going to speak volumes to our audience.
It's been amazing. You're amazing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. If you want to reach out, if you have any questions or you want to unpack anything further, don't hesitate to drop me an email, info@nalinitranquim.com. I love you. I will talk to you soon.
To learn more about Nalini's online coaching programs, visit nalinitranquim.com/store. Thank you for listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.